For today's video, we chose one of the most controversial and, strangely enough, one of the most human characters in the Potter universe. A man whose soul was literally torn into pieces and locked away inside objects that held personal meaning for him. Yes, we are talking about Tom Riddle. As always, let's go step by step. Tom Riddle is far too large and complex a figure to fit into a single video, so today we will focus on just one aspect: Horcruxes and the soul of Voldemort itself. More specifically, we will examine a question that has long fascinated Potter fans. How did the creation of each Horcrux affect the wizard's psychological and emotional state? Did it affect him at all? Or is this simply a popular fan belief? Let us begin with the very first Horcrux, the Diary of Tom Marvolo Riddle. But before that, it is important to understand who Tom was before he began splitting his own soul. Even while living in the orphanage, he shows not only remarkable magical abilities, but also a clear tendency toward violence, manipulation, and controlling others. Already at that time, he develops a deep and unhealthy fear of death. At the same time, Tom openly enjoys his own sense of superiority, fully aware of how unique his gift as a Parselmouth truly is. During his school years, he gathers a group around himself fairly early, a prototype of the future Death Eaters. According to Albus Dumbledore, many strange and disturbing incidents are connected to this group. This is roughly who Tom Riddle remains up until 1943, the year that becomes a turning point. It is during this time that the future Dark Lord, judging by the diary entries, discovers information about the Chamber of Secrets and, almost simultaneously, learns about Horcruxes. It is important to note that, at first, Tom did not plan to use this particular method of achieving immortality. The reason remains unclear, but the fact itself is undeniable. The basilisk, once again relying on the diary's account, carries out several attacks. Students suffer, but none of them die. Most likely, just as in Harry Potter's time, they only see the creature indirectly and are petrified. The monster is never exposed, and Riddle himself does not finish off the victims, even though he has both a physical body and the opportunity to do so, unlike his future diary version. This raises a logical question. How, then, did Moaning Myrtle die? Let us recall the circumstances. She was crying in the bathroom when Riddle arrived and summoned the basilisk. Myrtle was not the target. She stepped out of the stall herself to chase away the boy she heard, and saw the creature's eyes. That is what caused her death. If we consider this tragedy an accident, another problem arises. An accidental killing should not split the soul, since intention is required. This means that either Tom knew Myrtle was in the bathroom, or the events unfolded in the most sinister possible way. Either way, the basilisk kills Myrtle, and Tom Riddle's soul experiences its first fracture. Almost immediately afterward, he puts his idea into action and creates his first Horcrux, the diary bearing his own name. Did anything change after that? Outwardly, no. He remains the same charming, intelligent, handsome Tom. He still desperately wants to avoid returning to the hated orphanage. He continues to feel emotions, to worry, to live like a human being. But inside, he is now a creature that has tasted blood. Even if it was partly accidental, it is irreversible. The monster has only just begun to awaken. And already at 16 years old, judging by the descriptions in the books, meaning immediately after the end of his 5th year at Hogwarts and the events involving the basilisk, Tom Riddle, having acquired a taste for it, goes further. As we know, he visits his family, on both sides. On his mother's side, he visits his uncle Morphin, and on his father's side, he visits Tom Riddle Sr. and his parents. The outcome of this trip is well known. All three are killed by the killing curse. The blame is carefully shifted onto Morphin, and Tom takes Marvolo Gaunt's ring. From this ring, he creates his second Horcrux, using the fracture in his soul caused by the murder of his own relatives. And what is especially important, we see Riddle almost immediately after this event. In Horace Slughorn's memory, Tom appears virtually unchanged. The second split of the soul and the loss of yet another fragment seem to leave no visible mark on him. Before us stands the same charming, attractive, and polite young man. Yes, Harry occasionally notices a feral, almost animalistic expression breaking through on Tom's face. But if we recall the scene in the orphanage, similar flashes appeared in Riddle long before the creation of the first Horcruxes. In other words, this is not a consequence of the soul being split, but a trait that existed in him from the very beginning. At the same time, Tom is already completely focused on the idea of immortality. For him, moral boundaries and justifications no longer exist. There is not even a trace of ideology here, unlike what some fans try to attribute to Salazar Slytherin, such as purifying Hogwarts to preserve magical heritage. Riddle's approach is entirely different. He treats the matter with cold pragmatism. The soul must be divided into 7 parts because 7 is the most powerful magical number. Full stop. And this is where something truly strange begins. Judging by the memories, already at 16 years old, Tom is fully morally prepared to achieve immortality. And yet, he does nothing. He finishes school and, according to different accounts, spends somewhere between 10 and 15 years, roughly from 1945 to 1956 or even 1959, working at Borgin & Burke's. Officially, this is to keep track of magical relics, but in practice, he finds nothing. At the same time, Tom has known since his school years where Ravenclaw's diadem is hidden. The secret was revealed to him by Helena herself. He does not search for relics, does not delve deeper into forbidden branches of magic, does not pursue new experiments, and does not even attempt to carry out the plan of 7 Horcruxes. He simply lives and works. And throughout all this time, he already has 2 Horcruxes. Yet they appear to have no noticeable effect on him. The real turning point comes much later, an event that does not merely change Tom Riddle's life, but finally and completely transforms him into Voldemort. Of course, we are talking about his visit to Hepzibah Smith and the display of her treasures. And here, there is one extremely revealing detail. Hufflepuff, Cup interests Riddle as a rare and valuable artifact, but his reaction to Salazar Slytherin's locket is entirely different. At that moment, Tom literally loses control of himself, stops noticing Hepzibah altogether, and sinks into his own thoughts. Even Miss Smith herself becomes frightened. It is then that she first notices a reddish, inhuman glint in his eyes. What had been dormant inside him for years finally awakens. It is Slytherin's locket that stirs the true Voldemort within Riddle. Memories return, of Horcruxes, of his past, of his mother's fate, and of the steps he has already taken. Soon afterward, Hepzibah dies, poisoned by the Dark Lord, and Tom's life changes completely and irreversibly. He leaves Britain, travels across Europe, immerses himself in the dark arts, and begins to create Horcruxes on a large scale, using the cup, the locket, and the diadem rediscovered in the forests of Albania. The result of this transformation is already visible in Albus Dumbledore's memories when Voldemort returns to Britain a decade later. Outwardly, he now bears almost no resemblance to the handsome and charming Tom Riddle he was just 10 years earlier. It is precisely this transformation that is most often linked to the influence of Horcruxes, to the gradual loss of the soul's integrity and, along with it, the loss of a human appearance. At the same time, one cannot ignore the fact that the books mention an entire series of magical rituals that Voldemort performed on himself, which could also have affected his physical form. Albus Dumbledore specifically refers to this in the second book, during his explanation after the death of the basilisk. Psychologically, The Dark Lord already fully matches the changes we see on the outside. He still tries to flatter Dumbledore, but this is no longer the careful, calculated manner of the orphanage boy or the 15-year-old prefect. Before us stands a wizard who presents himself as seasoned and experienced, someone who is not merely debating the nature of magic with the headmaster, but trying to engage him in a subtle game of manipulation, testing who is the greater schemer. This is a man who is ready to start a war, and who does in fact start it after being refused. After that, for a full 11 years, the wizarding community of Britain has very little reason for joy. At the same time, it is important to note one more detail. Throughout this entire period, Voldemort does not create his final, 6th Horcrux. According to Dumbledore, Tom planned to do this only after killing Harry Potter in Godric's Hollow. That means there was no talk of Nagini becoming a Horcrux at that time, certainly not in advance. And since we have mentioned Harry, it is logical to move on to the next stage, from the events in Godric's Hollow to the very end of the story. This period includes the unintended split of the soul, with a fragment ending up inside Harry, the creation of the Horcrux from Nagini in 1994, and the effect all of this has on Voldemort himself. Two aspects are especially important here: the physical transformation of Tom's appearance and his psychological fixation on Harry Potter. Let us begin with appearance. In Godric's Hollow, Voldemort loses his body, most likely retaining the same form we see in Dumbledore's memory, since no other radical changes occur before this point. Afterward, he exists in a state described as less than a spirit, and only years later, after killing the Muggle Frank and creating the Horcrux from Nagini, does he regain a physical body through a dark ritual. And this is where the debate begins. On one hand, the red-eyed, almost skeletal creature with serpentine features is explained by two further fractures of the soul: the creation of the Horcrux from Nagini and the so-called ersatz Horcrux in the form of Harry. On the other hand, these metamorphoses are linked to the curse of unicorn blood that Voldemort drank, as well as to the body restoration ritual itself. All of these versions are equally plausible, and at the same time, none of them can be considered the ultimate truth. Each rests on certain facts, yet none provides a complete answer. However, far more important than physical appearance is something else: Voldemort's psychological obsession with the surviving Potter. Many fans find it strange, even inappropriate for a great dark wizard, even one with obvious manic tendencies. This is often explained through the influence of Horcruxes, the idea that with each new split of the soul, Voldemort became increasingly irrational. But if we look deeper, it is hard to say that Horcruxes are directly to blame for this. Rather, their influence was indirect. They did not create this obsession, but merely amplified the traits that had been present in Tom Riddle from the very beginning. So what, then, is the true root of Tom Riddle's fixation on the idea of personally destroying Harry Potter? To understand this, we need to take a step back. Harry became a threat to Voldemort almost immediately, at first only as an abstract prophecy about a child born at the end of the 7th month. But afterward, it is precisely because of Potter that the Dark Lord loses absolutely everything, and for a long 10 years is condemned to a state that can hardly be described as anything other than a hell of despair. Just imagine it. A wizard who firmly believes in his own uniqueness suddenly becomes less than a spirit. He realizes that none of his followers will come to help him, that he is forgotten, abandoned, and essentially doomed. And then hope appears. The Philosopher's Stone. A chance to regain a body, and once again, Harry Potter takes everything away from him, sending him back into that endless non-existence. After something like this, it is not just easy to become obsessed with personally destroying the insignificant brat. Complete madness would be close at hand. Yet Voldemort, and this is important, retains his rationality. In the fourth book, he is willing to wait an entire year, existing in a pitiful, almost helpless body, even though he could easily have followed Peter's advice and restored a physical form using any wizard who hated him. But simply living again is not enough for Tom. He needs to eliminate the threat. Yes, a weak one, but far more importantly, one that is invulnerable to him. And this is the very Harry whom Albus Dumbledore, incidentally, quite deliberately uses as a kind of living torpedo against the Dark Lord. And here begins the internal conflict that will haunt Riddle until the very end. The struggle between cold rationality and impulsive, almost painful urges. Tom is, in fact, rational. He understands his actions perfectly well. Just look at the careful, almost bureaucratic takeover of the Ministry of Magic, carried out without open assault or hysteria. But when it comes to Harry, Riddle seems to short-circuit. Even knowing that it would be far easier to remove the threat through his followers, he cannot bring himself to do it. And it is precisely this realization that is especially revealing. It is no coincidence that Voldemort repeatedly emphasizes that Harry must die by his hand, and that the Death Eaters are forbidden to interfere under any circumstances. And the more attempts he makes, starting with Godric's Hollow, and the more often he fails, the stronger this fixation becomes. Because with each new failure, he receives confirmation of his deepest fear. Voldemort begins to genuinely believe that Harry truly is the Chosen One. And the Dark Lord, convinced of his own uniqueness, cannot find any other explanation for why an objectively weaker wizard emerges victorious again and again. That means fate must be broken. That means the final enemy must be destroyed at any cost. And here we finally return to our main question, the influence of Horcruxes on Voldemort. Because Harry Potter, the person who changed Tom Riddle more than anyone else, is himself the bearer of a fragment of his soul. Even if it was an unplanned, accidental ersatz Horcrux, it undeniably contributed to the distortion of the personality that was once Tom Riddle. So what do you think? Which Horcrux had the strongest impact on Voldemort and changed him beyond recognition? Share your theories in the comments. It will truly be interesting to read them. After everything we have already examined, a logical question arises. If Horcruxes did not cause immediate or visible psychological collapse in Tom Riddle, if for years he remained externally and internally stable, rational, and controlled, then where exactly did his plan go wrong? Why did a path to immortality that appeared calculated, methodical, and almost mathematically precise ultimately lead not to triumph, but to complete ruin? To answer this, we need to step back and look not at Horcruxes as objects, but at the very idea of perfect immortality, as Tom Riddle understood it. It is important to clarify one thing from the outset. Riddle was not a mystic in the traditional sense. Unlike many dark wizards, he did not believe in symbols. He used them. The number 7 in the wizarding world is considered the most powerful magical number. This is not a religious belief, but a well-established principle of magical theory. 7 represents completeness, stability, and balance. This is why Tom chose to divide his soul into 7 parts rather than 3 or 5. But here lies a subtle distinction. Riddle was not seeking harmony. He was seeking control. He viewed the number 7 not as a natural structure, but as the upper limit of what was possible. The maximum potential that could be extracted from the concept of a Horcrux. In other words, he did not simply want immortality. He wanted to be perfectly insured against death. Traditionally, a Horcrux was seen as an extreme measure, something close to desperation. Not a path, but an emergency exit. Even among dark wizards, it was considered a last resort. For Riddle, however, the Horcrux became the foundation of a system. He did not create them in moments of fear or immediate danger. On the contrary, he created them in periods of relative calm, deliberately and in advance. This is where the first fracture between theory and reality appears. By its nature, a Horcrux acts as an anchor. It prevents the soul from moving on. But an anchor dropped too many times does not hold the ship. It begins to tear the hull apart. Riddle never accounted for this. He treated the soul as something that could be divided endlessly without losing functionality, as a resource, as raw material. But a soul is not an artifact. This leads to another important question. If Riddle was so rational, why did he not seriously consider alternative forms of extended existence? The magical world offers many possibilities. The Philosopher's Stone. Binding oneself to objects without soul fragmentation. The half-life of ghosts. Magical portraits. Experimental bodily transformations. The answer lies in a single word: uniqueness. Each of these methods carried a flaw that Tom Riddle found unacceptable. They either depended on an external source, required the surrender of autonomy, or, worst of all, demanded acceptance of limitations. A ghost is a shadow. A portrait is a reflection. The stone is dependence. Riddle wanted to remain a complete, living being, beholden to no one and nothing. Horcruxes promised exactly that: immortality without compromise. And this is where the central illusion takes shape. Horcruxes create the sensation of absolute security. Death of the body ceases to be final. But this perceived safety is also the trap. With each new Horcrux, Riddle shifted the core of his vulnerability outward. His existence became scattered across the world, contained in objects, places, and creatures. Formally, he became harder to kill. In practice, he became dependent. An enemy who understands the principle behind Horcruxes does not face a single obstacle, but multiple points of attack. And most importantly, those points lie beyond Voldemort's direct control. He could hide them, he could guard them, but he could not sense their destruction in advance. This was not a magical miscalculation, it was a strategic one. As discussed earlier, Horcruxes did not drive Riddle into madness. He remained capable of long-term planning, careful manipulation, and rational thought. But it was precisely this rationality that blinded him to the obvious. He assessed threats only in terms of power. Yet his greatest enemy was not power, but understanding. When Dumbledore began assembling the truth, Voldemort still believed his system was flawless. He never considered that the very mechanism of soul division could be turned against him. That confidence was logical if one truly believed oneself to be the only wizard to reach such depths of forbidden knowledge. The number 7 was meant to symbolize completeness. In Riddle's case, it became a symbol of irreversible fragmentation. His soul was no longer the center of his identity. It became a network. And a network can be destroyed not at a single point, but at its nodes. Each destroyed Horcrux did not immediately weaken Voldemort, but it stripped away another layer of protection, forcing him once again to confront what he had fled from his entire life: mortality. This is why the end of his story is not accidental. He does not lose because he lacked strength. He does not lose because he lacked intelligence. He loses because he chose a path in which immortality mattered more than life itself. We now arrive at the point where Horcruxes, numbers, and magical theory stop being sufficient explanations, because even the most elaborate system of immortality does not explain one fundamental thing: why death, more than anything else, terrified Tom Riddle. At first glance, the answer seems obvious. Death is the ultimate enemy. Every living being fears it. But this explanation collapses almost immediately when we look at how differently others in the wizarding world relate to mortality. Wizards accept death in ways that Tom never could. Some delay it, some negotiate with it, some even mock it. But very few build their entire identity around escaping it. Tom Riddle does. And that is why the real question is not why he feared death, but what death represented to him. To understand this, we must return not to Hogwarts, not to Horcruxes, and not even to dark magic, but to something far more mundane and far more damaging: insignificance. Tom Riddle's earliest memories are not of power, discovery, or ambition. They are memories of anonymity. He is one child among many in a Muggle orphanage. No lineage, no name of consequence, no one who looks at him and sees destiny. He is not special by default. He must prove it. And this is where his fear begins. For Tom, death is not simply the end of existence. It is the ultimate confirmation that he never truly mattered. That despite all his brilliance, all his superiority, all his power, the world could continue without him. That he could vanish without consequence. This is an idea he cannot tolerate. From a very young age, Tom demonstrates an obsession not just with control, but with recognition. He wants to be seen, feared, remembered. His cruelty is not random, it is performative. Each act of domination is a statement: I exist, and I am above you. Magic becomes the perfect tool for this. It proves that he is different, better, chosen, even if no one else has said so yet. And when Dumbledore confirms that he is a wizard, it does not calm him. It validates him. It confirms what he already believes, that he is not meant to be ordinary. But here is the crucial detail. Even magic does not remove the fear. Because magic does not guarantee permanence. Power fades. Reputation fades. Even the greatest wizards die. And death, for Tom, is not neutral. It is humiliation. This is why his relationship with death differs so sharply from that of characters like Dumbledore. Where Dumbledore sees death as a boundary, Tom sees it as an insult. A limitation imposed on him personally. A rule that applies to lesser beings, not to someone like him. This distinction is vital. Tom does not reject death on philosophical grounds. He does not argue that death is unjust or cruel. He rejects it because it contradicts his self-image. If he is truly unique, then a common fate is unacceptable. This is also why love plays such a strange and distorted role in his psychology. Love, by its nature, connects people. It equalizes. It implies vulnerability, mutual dependence, and the possibility of loss. To love is to accept that someone else has power over you, emotionally, if not physically. Tom cannot allow this. Love threatens the very structure of his identity. It suggests that he is not self-sufficient, that he needs something beyond himself. And, more importantly, it suggests that he could be replaced. So, instead of love, he chooses legacy. Not legacy in the sense of children or students, but legacy as presence. His name, his fear, his mark on the world. Voldemort is not merely an alias, it is a monument. A declaration that Tom Riddle will not fade quietly. This is why Horcruxes are so appealing to him beyond their practical function. They are not just anchors. They are proof that he has transcended the rules, that he has done what no one else dared to do, that he has inscribed himself into reality in a way that cannot be erased easily. But here again we encounter the central paradox. The more Tom tries to escape insignificance, the more he strips himself of the very qualities that make significance meaningful: empathy, connection, continuity. By dividing his soul, he preserves existence, but sacrifices identity. And this trade-off is not immediately visible. For years, even decades, it appears to work. He commands followers, he inspires fear. His name becomes taboo. Children grow up knowing who Voldemort is. From the outside, this looks like victory. Internally, however, something else is happening. Because fear-based significance is fragile. It requires constant reinforcement. Fear fades when the object of fear disappears. And the moment Voldemort loses his body, the nightmare he has been running from since childhood comes true. He becomes invisible. For 10 years, he exists as less than a spirit, unable to act, unable to be seen, unable to assert dominance. And worst of all, unable to remind the world that he matters. This period is rarely discussed in depth, but it is psychologically devastating. It is not just a setback, it is the collapse of his entire self-concept. And who is responsible for this collapse? A child. A child who does not know ancient magic, who does not understand Horcruxes, who does not fear Voldemort in the way the world once did. Harry Potter does not defeat Voldemort through superiority. He defeats him by surviving him, by existing as proof that Voldemort is not inevitable. This is why the obsession becomes so intense. It is not about prophecy. It is not about strategy. It is about identity. As long as Harry lives, Voldemort's narrative is incomplete. As long as Harry lives, the world remembers that Voldemort failed, that he can be resisted, that he is not absolute. Killing Harry is not a tactical necessity, it is a psychological one. This is also why Voldemort insists on doing it himself. Delegating the act would undermine its meaning. It would turn a personal reckoning into a procedural outcome. He does not want Harry dead. He wants Harry erased by him. Only then can the wound be closed. Only then can the story be rewritten. And this is where fear of death and fear of insignificance fully merge. Voldemort does not fear dying at the hands of Harry. He fears being defined by him. He fears that history will remember him not as the greatest dark wizard of all time, but as the one who was undone by a boy. This is why, even at the height of his power, after reclaiming his body and seizing control of the ministry, he cannot let go. Rationally, he has already won. Practically, Harry is isolated, hunted, and weakened. But emotionally, Voldemort is still that boy in the orphanage, terrified that his existence can be dismissed. And so he returns, again and again, to the same confrontation. Not because he must, but because he cannot accept a world in which his importance is not absolute. In the end, this is the tragedy of Tom Riddle. He achieves exactly what he set out to do. He avoids death longer than almost any wizard in history. He becomes a name that cannot be forgotten. But he never escapes insignificance. Because true significance does not come from refusing to die. It comes from being willing to live as part of something larger than oneself. And that was the one thing Tom Riddle could never do. To understand what finally separates Tom Riddle from everyone else in the story, we need to address the question that is most often simplified, misunderstood, or reduced to a single explanation: the question of love. It is frequently said that Voldemort could not love because he was conceived under the influence of a love potion. This explanation is neat, convenient, and deeply misleading. It shifts responsibility away from choice and turns a complex psychological failure into a biological inevitability. The books themselves do not support such a deterministic reading. Tom Riddle was not born incapable of emotion. He was born without experience of it. This distinction matters. Love is not an instinct that automatically activates. It is a learned response, shaped by attachment, trust, and vulnerability. Tom grows up without any of these. In the orphanage, relationships are transactional. Affection is scarce, unreliable, and often conditional. Children survive by competing, not bonding. From this environment, Tom learns a crucial lesson very early. Dependence is dangerous. To rely on someone is to give them leverage. To trust is to risk humiliation. To need is to admit weakness. These are not abstract ideas to him. They are practical survival rules. As a result, Tom does not reject love out of cruelty. He rejects it out of self-preservation. When he arrives at Hogwarts, this pattern does not disappear. It simply becomes more sophisticated. He studies people carefully. He mirrors what they expect. He offers charm, politeness, and intelligence, but none of it is rooted in connection. It is performance. This is why so many teachers like him. He gives them exactly what they want to see: respect, promise, potential. He understands social dynamics exceptionally well, not because he feels them, but because he analyzes them. And this analytical approach to human interaction becomes the defining feature of his adulthood. Tom does not lack empathy because he cannot understand others. He lacks empathy because understanding others does not move him emotionally. He can predict reactions. He can anticipate fear. He can exploit affection, but he cannot participate in it. This is also why his followers are not companions. They are instruments. The Death Eaters often speak of loyalty, devotion, even love for their master. Voldemort never reciprocates this. He does not see loyalty as a bond. He sees it as proof of hierarchy. Fear binds them to him far more reliably than affection ever could. Love, to Tom, is inefficient. It introduces variables he cannot control. It creates obligations. It demands sacrifice without guarantee of return. From his perspective, love is not power. It is exposure. And yet, there is a moment when this emotional absence becomes more than a personal limitation. It becomes a fatal blind spot. Because love is not merely an emotion in the wizarding world. It is a form of magic. This is something Tom never truly grasps. He understands spells. He understands rituals. He understands symbolic power. But he does not understand why sacrifice works, why protection born of choice can override superior force, why certain acts carry consequences beyond their immediate mechanics. When Lily Potter chooses to die rather than step aside, Voldemort registers the event only in practical terms. A woman interferes. A curse rebounds. A child survives. He does not understand that he has triggered a form of magic he has spent his entire life denying. This misunderstanding follows him throughout the series. Again and again, Voldemort dismisses acts of loyalty, love, and self-sacrifice as sentimental or irrelevant. He sees them as weaknesses to be exploited, not as sources of strength. This is why he underestimates Dumbledore. Not intellectually, but emotionally. He cannot conceive that someone would willingly delay or even reject power for the sake of others. He assumes every choice must be rooted in self-interest, because that is the only logic he recognizes. And this is where the possibility of change must be addressed. Could Tom Riddle have become someone else? The uncomfortable answer is yes. Not easily, not quickly, but theoretically. There are moments where the path is not yet closed, when he is still capable of curiosity rather than compulsion. When he seeks knowledge rather than domination. When he asks Slughorn questions rather than issuing commands. But each of these moments passes without challenge. No one forces him to confront his emptiness. No one demands vulnerability from him. And without resistance, his habits harden into identity. Change requires friction. It requires the willingness to be seen as flawed, to accept dependence, to risk rejection. Tom avoids all of these with surgical precision. By the time he becomes Voldemort, the cost of change is no longer acceptable. To change would mean admitting that his life has been built on a false premise, that power without connection is hollow, that immortality without meaning is empty. This is why redemption is never truly on the table, not because he is incapable of remorse, but because remorse would destroy the structure that keeps him whole. He cannot regret without unraveling, and so he chooses consistency over transformation. In the end, Voldemort's inability to love is not his greatest moral failing. It is his greatest strategic failure. Because love is the one force he cannot predict, cannot replicate, and cannot counter once it is freely chosen. Every major defeat he suffers traces back to this gap in understanding. Every advantage his enemies gain comes from bonds he dismisses as irrelevant. He believes himself to be beyond humanity. What he never realizes is that by rejecting the human capacity for connection, he places himself at a permanent disadvantage. He becomes powerful, but isolated, immortal, but incomplete, feared, but fundamentally alone. And that is why, despite everything he achieves, Tom Riddle never truly wins. By the time Voldemort reaches the final stage of his story, everything appears to be in his favor. His body is restored, his followers have returned, his enemies are scattered, hunted, or silenced. The Ministry of Magic has fallen without a public battle. On the surface, this is not the portrait of a defeated man. And yet, this is precisely the moment when his fate is already sealed. To understand why, we need to look not at what Voldemort lacks, but at what he refuses to question. Throughout his life, Tom Riddle operates on a single, unexamined assumption: that power is the ultimate solution to every problem. More power means more control. More control means fewer uncertainties, and fewer uncertainties means safety. This belief has served him well for decades. It has carried him from an orphanage to the heights of magical dominance. It has allowed him to survive death itself. It has shaped every strategic decision he has ever made. But it also contains the seed of his final error. Because power, as Voldemort understands it, is purely accumulative. It is something to be collected, layered, and reinforced. Horcruxes are the clearest example of this logic. If one safeguard is good, 7 must be better. If one body can be destroyed, then multiple anchors ensure survival. What he never considers is that accumulation does not equal resilience. A system can be powerful and still be brittle. By distributing his soul, Voldemort creates redundancy, but he also creates dependency. Each fragment becomes something that must be protected, hidden, preserved. His immortality stops being internal. It becomes logistical. This is why his downfall does not come from a single overwhelming blow, but from a process, a methodical dismantling. One Horcrux at a time. He never truly adapts to this threat, because adaptation would require him to acknowledge a mistake, and acknowledging a mistake would undermine the image of infallibility he has constructed around himself. Instead, he doubles down. When he learns that Harry may be connected to his survival, he does not pause to reassess the nature of that connection. He does not consider severing it indirectly. He does not explore alternatives. He fixates. This fixation is not strategic. It is emotional. For all his insistence on logic, Voldemort cannot tolerate a loose end that challenges his narrative. Harry is not merely a danger, he is a contradiction. Proof that Voldemort's understanding of magic and fate is incomplete, and incomplete understanding is intolerable. This is why Voldemort insists on killing Harry himself, even when delegating the task would be safer and more efficient. He frames it as destiny, but it is pride. Killing Harry is not about eliminating a threat, it is about restoring coherence to his worldview. At the same time, Voldemort continues to misinterpret the nature of loyalty. He believes that ownership of the Elder Wand guarantees obedience, that mastery over the most powerful wand ever made secures victory. But the wand does not respond to power alone. It responds to relationship. This is another concept Voldemort cannot internalize. He understands dominance. He does not understand allegiance. He assumes that conquest produces loyalty. In reality, it produces compliance, which collapses the moment fear loses its immediacy. This misunderstanding culminates in the final confrontation. Voldemort stands armed with superior knowledge, superior force, and what he believes to be superior mastery. He has done everything correctly, according to his own logic. What he has not done is account for the ways in which his choices have hollowed out his position. His followers hesitate. His protections fail. His assumptions unravel one by one. And at the center of it all stands Harry, not as a rival in power, but as a mirror. Harry represents everything Voldemort dismissed as irrelevant: dependence, sacrifice, willingness to die, acceptance of limits. When Harry walks into the forest prepared to die, Voldemort interprets it as surrender. He does not recognize it as strategy. Because strategy, to him, is always about preservation. This is the moment where the difference between them becomes absolute. Voldemort has spent his entire life running from death. Harry steps toward it. Voldemort seeks immortality to avoid loss. Harry accepts loss to protect others. These two philosophies are not compatible, and in a world where magic responds to intent as much as technique, the difference matters. The final duel does not hinge on reflexes or raw power. It hinges on alignment, on whether one's understanding of magic matches the reality in which it operates. Voldemort's spells fail not because he is weak, but because his grasp of magic is incomplete. He understands how to bend it. He does not understand why it responds. And so, in the end, the last mistake is not tactical or even moral. It is conceptual. Voldemort believes that survival is the highest form of victory. He never considers that survival without meaning is indistinguishable from defeat. He secures existence at the cost of purpose. He avoids death, but forfeits life. And when the moment comes, when all calculations are exhausted and all protections stripped away, there is nothing left to sustain him. Not because he was outmatched, but because the path he chose could never lead anywhere else. This is the final irony of Tom Riddle's story. In trying to become eternal, he ensures that nothing of him can endure.